Today, we're going to take another look at the Tier 8 premium British destroyer HMS Druid, which received a buff in the December 2024 update. Got it for a rental from Wargaming to test out the buff. And I'm happy to report that this ship is in a much better state than it was when it was first released. The main issue with this ship, aside from the survivability of the two turrets on the bow, was the penetration characteristics of its AP. Of course, the Druid shoots only AP, it has no HE shells, and it has no torpedoes. The big problem was, versus enemy destroyers, all this AP seemed to do is overpen, and so it dealt only 10% of its maximum damage, which is not a lot. That was a problem when facing enemy destroyers, perhaps the biggest problem this ship had, because by its design, you would think it would be specially tuned to take out enemy destroyers. Well, the question is, has the buff made it more efficient and more effective at doing that? Let's ask the Lucian. He gets spotted here by us, and then he smokes up. We have a cruiser behind us that's able to radar the Lucian and provide us vision, but of course we can push into his smoke screen and catch him with the sonar ourselves. Now that he's spotted, take a look at the results here. It's almost exclusively full penetrations. We've got 1 overpen and 2 ricochets thus far. But the Lucian, he's already on his way back to port. There he goes, first blood medal, 21 full pens, 1 overpen, 2 ricochets. Now, as you can see, getting over penetrations on destroyers is no longer a problem. Prior to the buff, the shells had a 21 millimeter arming threshold. That has been reduced to 12 millimeters, and that speaks to the core mechanics of this game around AP shells. Whenever you shoot an AP shell, doesn't matter if it's a destroyer, cruiser, or battleship, you shoot it at a target, it hits the armor, provided it can penetrate the armor and doesn't ricochet. Then, when it penetrates, the question becomes, will it arm? Each shell has a fuse. It's got to penetrate a certain thickness of armor in order for that fuse to light. When it does light, the shell blows up internally inside of the target and causes damage. Otherwise, the shell can pass straight through the target without detonating, maybe because it's a very thin hull, for example, and there you get an overpen. Or the shell can penetrate a surface of armor that is lower than its arming threshold, which will also result in an overpen, and that was the main problem with the Lucian's guns. Pretty much every destroyer at this tier, Tier 8, and also at Tier 7 and Legendary tier, has a minimum armor plating of 19 millimeters. So previously, if you penned that 19 millimeters, the shells would not arm. They would simply not detonate inside of the target, and it would cause overpenetrations. Now the threshold has been reduced to 12 millimeters. That means they're going to arm on practically everything, even battleship superstructure, and if they can pen it, which I think we can on the Iowa, the upper belt armor. So it's not like this AP is completely anemic at dealing damage to even larger targets. I think all we've shot at so far is this Iowa, and we've been sitting in this smoke screen to do it for only a couple of seconds. We end this little sequence with about, I think by the end of it, 21,000 damage done against this Iowa. That's pretty significant for just sitting in a smoke screen and shooting at a broadside for a limited period of time. Obviously, that's going to be more effective against things with smaller HP pools, like, for example, cruisers. But the main role of this destroyer is dispatching enemy DDs. There we've got the Kitakazi, who's spotted by I don't even know what. Once again, the story is the same. Couple more overpens on the Kitakazi than we got against the Lucian, but that is going to be down to, I think, the shells making contact with the superstructure and possibly just passing right through that. Otherwise, mostly overpens, highly efficient damage. Kitakazi goes down, and we're going to be able to take this cap with no opposition. We can also take some shots at this Tulsa, who's spotted by one of our teammates. Of course, all our guns are in the front, so we can sort of bow tank the Tulsa to some degree, and then we can push back on the throttle to try to dodge his shells. We're mostly successful in that. I think one catches us on the nose. But because of the turret setup of the Druid, it offers an advantage like that. If you're bow on to a target that is fairly far away from you and maybe has to deal with some unfortunate dispersion, then you're a difficult target to hit. Unlikely that all the shells are going to make contact and deal a lot of damage, particularly if you're messing with the throttle. But then again, you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you're bow on to a number of enemies and they're pushing into you. You have no way to stop them from pushing because you have no torpedoes, and again, you have no way of stacking damage over time through fires or flood. The only damage you're ever going to get with this destroyer is the damage that you get from AP shell penetrations. And that's much more useful in scenarios like this, where your teammates have eliminated most of the HP pool of a particular target, and all that you need to do is finish them off. The Druid is very good at doing that, and then it's very good now at dealing damage to destroyers. Velos over here gets spotted. Unfortunately, he's spotting us. If this were a 1v1, I think we'd be able to easily take out the Velos, but he's got a Charles Martel behind him. So we decide that we're going to smoke up in order to avoid taking significant damage. We'll be able to turn around and head back into the fray, hopefully take out the Velos, and get vision of the Charles Martel. The big problem here is that we have no friendly teammates around. All we've got is the CV somewhere behind us, but whatever cruiser was with us earlier, he's been taken out. And so this Charles Martel, if he really, really wanted to, he could push directly into this cap. There's nothing to really stop him from doing that. We don't have any torpedoes to send his way. So if he does want to push into us, he's probably faster than we are with his engine boost running. He could catch us, and he could sink us fairly easily. For whatever reason, though, he's decided that going for the Charlie cap is not a good use of his time. He's turning in the other direction. Most of our remaining teammates are on the Alpha flank. We've got a destroyer in there who's taken the cap, and we've got 2 battleships following him. So at this point, we've decided we're going to push into the enemy spawn. The only things that were there was the Charles Martel, which is running away, and the Velos, which is in some part of the map that we're not aware of. But if I had to guess, he's probably following his Charles Martel, because both of them seem to think all the action is happening at the Alpha cap. So we'll be able to follow them, but we know there's a battleship in the Bravo cap. Kind of a crazy thing. Usually you don't see the enemy battleship pushing straight into the center of the map and taking the center cap here with no opposition, but that's exactly what occurred. Perhaps that is in part due to the fact the enemy battleship is a Jean Bar, which is a very strong ship. Looks like he's headed back out of the Alpha cap, though. He may be reversing. And my idea was to maybe see if I could get some vision on him. Doesn't look like I have any teammates around to shoot him, but I was assuming if he pushed straight into the center of the map, he probably doesn't have all that much HP left. I think one of the loading screens gives some advice. It says pushing into the center of the map is generally a poor tactic. That is especially true if you're in a big visible ship like a battleship. So we're going to approach the Charlie cap. There's really no pressure, or the Bravo cap rather. There's really no pressure on us to take it. The blue team has secured both Charlie thanks to us and Alpha thanks to our teammates over there. So we have the cap advantage. All that we have to do is not push into the enemy. Unfortunately, we've got 2 battleships sitting in the same grid square in the Alpha cap. I don't know if they're trying to abuse will to rebuild, but as I've said many times, and I'll say again, the worst possible thing you could do with your battleships is put them right next to each other on the map. That guarantees that you will have 0 crossfires. It also allows the enemy to angle to only one part of the map so that they're reasonably protected against not only your guns, but their teammates' guns, or your teammates' guns, rather. So those battleships are going to get melted by the Charles Martel. The remaining cruiser, which is an Otago, hanging out somewhere near that part of the map, and of course, the enemy CV. Plus, the Velos has probably already made his way over there, and he can torpedo them to some degree. Jean Bar, as I suspected, was on low health. Friendly CV is going to help us finish him off, but once again, we see that the Druid can be useful in scenarios like that, where you're finishing off low HP targets. You just need enough time to do it, essentially. You could probably take down a battleship from full health to nothing with these guns, but it's going to take you several minutes. It'll only take you a few seconds if they've not got a lot of HP left. So now that the Bravo cap is clear, we have a decision we could make. We could push further into the enemy spawn to try to get vision on the Charles Martel or the Atago or even the Velos. But given the cap is open, there's nothing to stop us from taking it, we might as well secure it, particularly since it looks like the two friendly battleships are going to be headed back to port. In fact, one of them already has, which just leaves that one last blue battleship left alive. He's pushing into potentially the torpedoes from Velos. He's pushing into the HE spam of both Charles Martel and Atago, and the enemy CV. So there's no way he's going to succeed in this push. At this point, he should be turning around and kiting and allowing the enemy to push into him. That's what you do when you're in a situation like this, where it's 4v4, and all four of the enemy ships are basically in their own spawn. There's no advantage for you in pushing into the spawn, especially if you're a battleship that's pushing into two cruisers that can farm you down with HE. Just not going to work. You can expect to be sunk. The proper response to this would be for that battleship to kite away, which is something that a lot of the random blue teammates that you get are not going to recognize. And so they're just going to be able to melt that battleship and sink him, which is going to leave only me, the friendly cruiser that is in the Bravo cap, and the friendly CV, who's on the other side of the map. And frankly, the friendly CV is playing the best game, I think, out of all of my teammates. He's in a good unexpected position where I don't think he's going to be located very easily. He continues to send his planes out and deal damage, but the friendly battleship does go down, and the friendly cruiser is pushing in. He's also got the same sort of problem as the friendly battleship that just sunk. If he pushes into this area, we've still got Charles Martel out here. We've still got the CV. Both of them can see the friendly cruiser, and both the Atago and Charles Martel can farm him down very easily. Well, they won't even need to because he's going to take a torpedo from Velos. There he goes. So, what we need to do in order to secure the win here, because you can see it's 555 to 521, is we need to get a little bit more of a points lead. We can do that by sinking the Velos, which shouldn't take too long because he's on low health. We see him on the minimap, courtesy of the CV's minimap spotting. We know he's headed toward us, so we'll spot him momentarily, and we've got the guns ready to go. There we get spotted. He's got a little bit better detect than we do. His torpedoes are no problem, thanks to the self-defense sonar that we've got going. But we do want to turn away. We don't want to continue getting closer to Charles Martel and Atago. And as long as Velos turns just a little bit, which he does, we're able to take him out quite quickly and quite efficiently. We can then cut off the Charles Martel's line of sight, and we can retreat. The enemy CV is the biggest threat to us at this point. I think it is a Russian CV. Might be a Chikhalov or a Pobeda. But the torpedoes he sends toward us are not going to be all that much of a threat. If he comes back with the skip bombers, then maybe I'll get a little bit worried. But at this point, we've secured all three of the caps. There's just these two cruisers and the CV left alive. So what do? We take the win and we run. We don't try to win harder. Well, you know what? Maybe we do to a small degree. We're going to retreat back into the Bravo cap. We've got the Atago not too far away from us. So once we get behind this island chain here, maybe we can get a couple shots on the Atago and farm a little bit more damage. I don't think so, though. I think we're going to end up with about 76,000 damage done when this game is over. And that's okay. The Druid is very much a specialized ship. I think its goal is to take the capture circles and to counter enemy destroyers. At doing those two things, it is pretty good. It's also decent at dealing damage to broadside targets, whether they are cruisers or battleships, but that's not its primary role. Its primary role is to play the objectives. And sometimes that's all you need to do to impact the battle, even impact it a lot. This is, after all, a team game with teams of 9 versus 9. So you'll have to rely on your teammates to some degree to get some work done, but if they can rely on you to secure the objectives and eliminate the destroyer threats, then this can be a very good ship for impacting the outcome of the battle, in spite of its inability to deal big knockout punches with torpedoes or deal damage over time. It has neither one of those capabilities available to it, and yet it can still be an effective destroyer. But sometimes you just need to run. Thankfully, the friendly CV finishes off the Otago. That leaves only Charles Martel and the enemy CV. Enemy CV has shown no indication so far that he's going to be able to take us out, and Charles Martel simply doesn't have enough time to catch us before we get to 1,000 points. So we will win this match, and I wanted to show you it, even though it's not super spectacular. Definitely not impressive in terms of damage done, but in terms of doing our job to the best of our ability, I think we've done as well as anybody could expect to do in a match like this, and we're going to get rewarded for it with the victory. So, Druid, still a limited ship to some degree, a very specialized ship, but one that's unique. There's nothing else like it in the game, and now that the AP pen threshold has been reduced, it's very effective at taking out enemy DDs. So I think it's worth playing. Personally, I enjoy it. Should you spend 25,000 steel on it? I don't know. The jury's still out on that question, but it's definitely improved. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.